All right, so you sent over all this stuff about parallax, and honestly, I gotta say I'm pretty intrigued.
Yeah, it's really quite amazing how this super simple idea, the apparent shift of an object's position when you're just looking at it from different angles, it pops up everywhere.
Yeah, it's like one of those things that's so basic, we kind of just take it for granted.
For sure.
Like, just think about when you're driving down the road,
Right.
those trees that are right next to you, they seem to just whoosh on by.
Yeah.
But then those mountains, way off in the distance,
Yeah, they just kind of sit there.
they barely seem to move at all. It's wild.
And that's really the basis for how astronomers calculate distances to the stars.
No way.
It's crazy to think about.
It's amazing something we see every day can be used to understand, like, the vastness of the universe.
Totally.
So how does that even work?
Well,
I was looking through the stuff you sent, and you mentioned using the Earth orbit as like a giant ruler.
right.
It's kind of hard to wrap my head around.
Yeah, so imagine you're an astronomer and you're looking at a star in January.
Right.
Then 6 months later, you look at that same star again, but now it's July.
Right.
And now the Earth is on the total opposite side of its orbit around the sun.
Oh, wow.
So you're looking at that same star, but from like a totally different spot.
So it's kind of like when you look at your finger with one eye closed and then you switch eyes.
Ain't
It
it?
looks like it's jumping back and forth.
It's a perfect analogy.
Cool.
And just like your finger seems to shift, that star will also appear to move a little bit. It'll move against the background of all the other stars that are farther away.
Oh, that's cool.
And astronomers can measure this tiny little shift, which is called the parallax angle.
Okay.
And that's how they figure out how far away the star is.
So the bigger the shift, the closer the star is.
Exactly. They actually have a formula they use to calculate it.
Okay.
It involves these things called arc seconds.
Arc seconds.
Yeah, super tiny units for measuring angles. Like, imagine slicing a circle into tons of teeny tiny pieces.
Wow.
Well, 1 arc second is 1/3600th of a degree.
That's a lot of slices.
I know, right?
But I got to be honest, all those numbers just kind of make my head spin.
Yeah, no worries.
Can you just give me the takeaway without all the math?
Basically, it all boils down to this: the smaller the parallax angle, the farther away that star is.
Okay.
And astronomers use this special unit called a parsec.
A parsec.
Yeah, it's equal to about 3.26 light years,
Wow.
which is really just a way of expressing these mind-boggling distances.
That's wild how something so simple can help us understand such huge scales.
Aye.
But this method must have its limits,
Oh,
right?
for sure.
You can't just measure the parallax for every star in the universe.
That's true. It works best for stars that are relatively nearby.
Okay.
The farther a star is, the smaller its parallax angle.
Makes sense.
And eventually it gets so tiny that we just can't measure it accurately,
Yeah.
even with the most powerful telescopes we have. Actually, speaking of powerful telescopes, you mentioned the Gaia mission.
Right.
That's like the ultimate parallax machine.
So what's so special about it?
So Gaia is this space observatory, and it's making the most accurate 3D map of our galaxy that we've ever had.
No way.
I know, right?
That's so cool.
It's measuring the parallax of over 1 billion stars.
1 billion.
It's crazy.
Wow, that's amazing.
But even Gaia has limits.
Really?
Yeah.
So there's a point where parallax just isn't enough to map the universe?
Exactly. For objects that are super far away, astronomers have to use other techniques.
Oh, right.
Like, they measure what's called the redshift of light.
Redshift.
Yeah. That's based on the idea that the universe is expanding.
Oh, right.
And the light coming from these distant galaxies gets stretched as it travels, which shifts it towards the red end of the spectrum.
Interesting.
But that's a whole other story.
Let's save that for another deep dive.
For sure.
But before we go too far down that cosmic rabbit hole,
Right.
I want to switch gears a little bit.
Okay.
One of the sources you sent mentioned this thing called the Tenerife airport disaster.
Oh, right.
And it said that parallax, or rather the lack of it, played a role.
It's true.
Really?
It's a pretty stark reminder that parallax isn't just some abstract idea.
Wow.
There was this really dense fog at the airport that day,
Oh, no.
and it made it almost impossible for the pilots to judge distances.
Oh, gee.
They couldn't really see anything.
Right.
And because they were missing those clear parallax cues, they misjudged where the other planes were.
Oh, wow.
And that's ultimately what led to the collision.
That's so scary to think about how something we rely on so much, our ability to see depth,
Yeah.
can have such terrible consequences when it's not working properly.
For sure, it really highlights how crucial parallax is for us to just move around safely in the world and do everyday things.
Yeah.
Like imagine trying to drive or catch a ball.
Yeah, or even just walk through a crowded room
Exactly.
without being able to perceive depth.
It'd be a nightmare.
It would. So it's like parallax isn't just some fancy science term.
Right.
It's really woven into how we experience the world.
Totally.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it really is. And it goes even deeper than just seeing things in 3D.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's about how our brains use parallax to, like, make sense of the world.
Okay.
Like, predict where things are going and just keep our perception stable
Hmm.
with all the visual stuff going on around us all the time.
That's what I thought was so cool about the stuff you said.
Right.
Like this whole idea that there's a chemical side to how we perceive depth.
Totally.
It's not just about our eyes, it's
Yeah.
about what's happening in our brains, too.
Exactly. And two of the big players in this whole process are dopamine and serotonin.
Dopamine and serotonin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, dopamine is that feel-good chemical,
Right.
but it's also super important for how our brains predict and understand movement,
Huh?
which is a key part of depth perception.
So it's like dopamine is our brain's internal GPS, always updating our depth perception as we move around.
That's a great way to put it. Like, let's say you're trying to catch a ball.
Okay.
Your brain is using dopamine to process all those parallax cues
Okay.
to predict where the ball is going to be next.
Wow.
Dopamine helps fine-tune those predictions so you can make that awesome catch.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is.
So what about serotonin?
So serotonin,
What does it do?
it acts as like a stabilizer.
A stabilizer.
Yeah, it keeps your world from feeling like everything's constantly shifting around.
Oh, so it keeps our perception grounded even though we're constantly moving and seeing things from different angles.
Exactly.
Okay, so let me see if I got this right.
Sure.
Dopamine helps us anticipate and adjust to changes in depth.
Right.
And serotonin keeps our perception from going crazy.
You got it, that back and forth between prediction and stabilization.
Yeah.
That's what allows us to move around in a 3D world so smoothly.
It's not just about physical space, right?
No, it's not.
You mentioned this thing called emotional parallax.
Right.
I thought that was really interesting.
It is super interesting.
So it's the idea that our emotions can actually affect how we perceive how far away our memories are.
Exactly.
It's almost like our feelings can create their own kind of parallax effect.
It's like our internal landscape is also subject to the same principles of parallax.
Wow.
Like, think about it.
Right.
When you're feeling happy, those good memories feel really close.
Yeah.
Like they happened yesterday.
Right.
But when you're sad, even recent positive events can feel super distant.
It's like our mood changes how we see time.
Yeah, kind of like it's warping our perception of time.
I never really thought about it that way before.
Yeah, and there's actually a neurochemical reason for this too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, norepinephrine, which is involved in remembering emotional stuff.
Okay.
It seems to play a big role in this whole emotional parallax effect.
So it's not just a metaphor. There's real brain chemistry behind it.
That's right.
Wow. It's incredible how something as simple as parallax can be connected to something as complex as our emotions.
It really shows how our perception and emotions are all tangled up together.
Yeah.
They both shape how we experience the world in ways we're just starting to figure out.
That's wild.
You know, sometimes the best way to really understand something is to see it for yourself,
For sure.
to experience it.
I'm all about that.
Yeah,
Are there any cool, easy ways to see parallax in action?
absolutely. There are a few fun little experiments you can do.
Oh, fun. I love experiments.
Right. So one of them is called the street lamp test.
The street lamp test.
Yeah, the next time you're in a car that's moving,
Okay.
pick a street lamp that's close by and watch how it seems to move compared to things farther away.
Like buildings and trees and stuff.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that street lamp's going to look like it's zooming by,
Okay.
while those distant buildings barely move at all.
That's because the street lamp has a larger parallax angle, right?
You got it
Yeah.
because it's closer.
Right.
So it looks like it's moving faster.
So we're basically doing what astronomers do with stars,
Exactly.
but on a smaller scale.
Right.
I like it.
So what other parallax experiments can we try?
Let's do another one.
Okay, here's one that shows how the space between our eyes actually creates parallax.
Okay.
Hold up your index finger at arm's length
Okay. Got it.
and focus on it.
Okay.
Now close one eye and then the other.
Oh, yeah. I've done this before. It's trippy how much your finger seems to jump.
That's because each eye is seeing your finger from a slightly different spot.
Oh.
And the farther apart your eyes are, the bigger that jump will be.
Ah.
It's a pretty simple way to see how our binocular vision uses parallax.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Okay, last one, I promise.
Right.
What else you got?
Here's one that brings us back to astronomy.
Okay.
The next time you're on a road trip at night,
Okay.
look at the moon,
All right.
you'll notice that while everything else is whizzing by,
Uh-huh.
the moon looks like it's staying in the same place in the sky.
Oh, yeah. It's like the moon is following you.
That's right.
Oh.
It's like an illusion. It's because the moon is so far away
Huh.
that its parallax is super tiny.
So it's the same reason why those distant stars don't seem to move even though we're spinning around the sun?
Exactly.
It's amazing how we're always seeing these mini versions of cosmic parallax without realizing it.
It really shows how parallax connects the stuff we do every day
Yeah.
to the massive scale of the universe.
It's a cool thought.
It is.
It's like the same rules apply everywhere.
For sure, from how we see depth
Right.
to how we map the entire cosmos.
This whole conversation has been really eye-opening.
Awesome. I'm
starting to see parallax everywhere,
That's great.
and it's changing how I think about the world.
That's what's so great about exploring science.
Totally.
It's not just about learning facts. It's about changing your perspective
Right.
and seeing the world in a whole new way.
And sometimes those really simple ideas
Yeah.
can have huge implications.
They really can.
You know, it's funny, we started talking about stars and ended up talking about emotions and memories.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
It's wild how something as basic as parallax can lead to so many different layers of understanding.
I know. It just goes to show you how much parallax is a part of how we experience the world.
Right. It's not just something we see, it's a big part of how we understand everything around us.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder if this idea goes even further.
How so?
Like, could parallax apply to other parts of our lives?
Like what?
I don't know, like maybe our relationships with other people.
That's a really interesting thought.
Yeah.
If you think about parallax as like a metaphor,
Okay.
it suggests that how we see someone can change based on our perspective,
Yeah.
like our emotional distance or even just how much time has passed.
Right. It's like how you might have known someone in high school.
Right.
And then years later, they seem like a totally different person.
Exactly. Or like how a friend might act one way in a group
Yeah.
and then totally different when you're one-on-one.
It's like our viewpoint changes, and all of a sudden we see them in a new light.
It's true. We're all constantly shifting our perspectives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And trying to make sense of the world
Right.
based on our own point of view.
And just like with parallax,
Mhm.
sometimes those changes in perspective can reveal things about people we never noticed before.
Exactly.
It's like a reminder that there's always more to learn,
For sure.
not just about the universe, but also about the people around us.
I agree.
And that to really understand someone, you have to consider different points of view. You have to be open to the complexity and never stop exploring.
Well said. I think that's one of the most important things parallax can teach us.
I agree.
It encourages us to question what we think we know, to look for new ways of seeing things,
Yeah.
and to remember that how we see the world is just at our own interpretation.
This whole conversation has really made me think.
I'm glad.
I'm definitely going to be looking at the world differently from now on.
That's awesome.
I'm going to be much more aware of all the parallax that's going on.
I think that's a great takeaway.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for guiding us through this deep dive.
It was my pleasure. It's been a really amazing journey.
I agree.
And for everyone listening out there, keep those minds curious.
Yes.
Keep changing your perspectives.
Exactly.
And keep looking for the parallax in your own lives.
You never know what you might find.
That's right.
It's all out there.
It is.